I want to talk to you about loneliness. I want to talk to you about loneliness, and I want to talk about it briefly, but I want to really capture this right in the middle of COVID, the loneliness of Corona, but the deeper loneliness that Corona accentuates, because as we said in our earlier podcast today, we talked about the podcast church, the podcast One Church, One Communion. We talked about Corona accentuating the basic fault lines that are there. And we talked about a politics of eros and a politics of the body, right? And a breakdown in eros, which is the source of a breakdown in politics. And the two are inseparable. You can't separate the two in any way. The breakdown of the personal is the breakdown of the political. And it's the personal story, the story of the body, the story of the heart. Right? The phenomenology of eros that I've worked on with Christina for the last several years is about the story of the body and the heart together. It's the story about eros being love in the body and sex being love in the body. And it's the story about desire. And it's the story about desire for creativity and for meaning and for transformation. But it's all got to be located in the individual human's lived experience. You have to live it. And you've got to live it in spirit. You got to live it in realization. You got to live it in enlightenment. You got to live it in the enlightenment that lives in the body. And the eros that's encrypted in the body sacred. The Bill of Rights and the first principles are encrypted in the body sacred. They're told in the body and they're told in the heart. And there's no split between the two. And so we need to actually tell the story of the new human and the story of the new humanity, which begins with the individual. And then it goes to the communion. So it's first the individual Homo, amor, and then it's the one communion. Right? It's the community of Homo, amor. It's the unique selves that come together. So we're going to focus just on one piece of the story now. And it's an incredibly important piece. And with your permission, I'm going to tell you a story and then try and capture something. But before the story, I want to see if I can locate something with you for a second. Okay? There's an entire series of studies that are called mirror studies. And they began actually in the late 19th century, and they picked up with a couple of French researchers. They were mostly anecdotal, in which researchers actually watched their children very carefully to see when the children had the first glimpse of self-recognition. And it would be, they would look at themselves in the mirror and they'd maybe say their name, or they'd look at themselves in the mirror and there might be a red mark and they would touch the red mark on themselves. Right? There were these mirror studies. It's before mirror neurons, not mirror neurons, Nathan. It's before, there's actually something else, not mirror neurons. That's a much later development. Mirror studies are, when do you locate yourself in the mirror? Right? The first glimmer of self-recognition. And it's not actually a one-time event. Not a one-time event. It's actually one of the things we know from the research. And the research got much more formal. There were about 4 major studies after the anecdotal research. We know that it's not an event. It's actually a continuum. But there's this moment of self-recognition. That's the first step, self-recognition. Everyone with me? But then there's a moment, and I'm going to take my face off for a second. So I want you just to follow the words if you can, because it's a really big deal. It's before Ken. It's even before I'm an individual. Right? It's a second before that. Self-recognition is the first stage of self-recognition. And then the second stage, right, is self-awareness, Ken, which is what you're talking about. Okay? And I want to just kind of track this with me for a second. What does it mean, right, to look in the mirror, right, and to understand for the first time, but you understand it clearly, that actually what you're seeing in the mirror is nothing other than what other people see when they look at you. So this is not the first moment of self-recognition of a baby. This happens closer to 7 or 8 years old. I want to say it again because it's very deep, and I want to kind of get my face out of the way and just follow the words, okay? Right, so what does it mean? There's a certain moment when you move from self-recognition to self-awareness. When you look in the mirror and you get the sense that what you see is what other people see when they look at you, okay? So this moment, Lacan talked about this, right? And Merleau-Ponty talked about this, and Henry Wallen talked about this, right? But it's this moment This is when your identity is birthed in the world, but at the very same time, it's also the moment which you're ripped into. It's what R.D. Laing, who really studied these thinkers, called the divided self. It's the actual moment where your loneliness begins. It's the birth of your alienation from the world. Right? And there's this distinction, right? And it's very, very deep, but I want you to get it, right? It's in this moment, it's in this leap from kind of self-recognition to self-awareness. That's the moment when the psyche is torn in two. But the shock is not, right? It's not that other exists. That's not the shock, right? That you understand earlier. But what you realize is that you yourself are an other for all others. Does everyone get that sentence? I want you to see if you can get that sentence. You realize that you yourself are an other for all others. Does everyone get that? You realize you yourself, you look in the mirror, right? You look in the mirror and you see, oh, right, you can actually look, you look in the chat box, right? I look, I see, oh, there's Mark. But then I realize, right, and this is about 8 years old, that when people see me, they're not seeing me inside. They're not feeling my interiority. They're not feeling me intimately, right? Intimacy is feel me feeling you. And we've talked about intimacy. It's shared identity. It means we can actually feel each other. But actually, there's a breakdown in intimacy in the very process of development. And there's this moment where I move from self-recognition to self-awareness, this moment in which the psyche's torn in two, in which I look and I realize, when I look in the mirror and I see that figure, Mark, Ken, right, Kirsten, Nathan, and I'm shocked because I realize that when others look at me, they see me as an other. How many people got that? It's incredibly deep and it's incredibly fundamental. How many people got, just give me a yes, how many people got that? Right? I mean, it's fundamental. This is the fundamental moment of alienation. It's where loneliness is born. Did you get that? That's why I become lonely. And I become lonely, and it happens on two levels. Now go a second level. Who's ready to go deeper? You ready to go deeper? Give me a yes if you can go deeper. Who can go deeper? You ready? So let's go deeper. So at that same moment, when I realize that when the other looks at me, I am other to the other. You get that? So in that same moment, I also begin to become other to myself. And as I also begin to be, right, I'm lonely because I can't quite find myself. I begin to experience myself based on, right, how I respond, how I'm socially accepted, right, how I'm validated. I begin to seek, right? I develop, right, this seeking self. I develop a winning formula that allows me, I might be laughing, I might be being clever, right? I might be hiding. I develop a winning formula, right, which allows me to navigate reality, but I actually become an other to myself as well, right? A mask. And now masks are legitimate. Masks are legitimate social mechanisms, but I actually forget that it's a mask. I lose connection to myself. There's an ancient text which says, Elohei masecha lo taselacha, which means literally, don't make gods of your masks. Right? So I get lost, I become my mask. So I become my mask in the same moment, I become my mask to other people. Other people see me as an other, but I become also an other to myself. And that's this fundamental failure of intimacy. And I get alienated from my own body. I can't rest in my body. And I begin to develop a kind of body armor. And my body begins to be distorted. And my heart begins to be somewhat corrupted. I don't trust the inner murmurings of the sacred, right, that speak in my heart. And I'm acculturated and socialized. And yes, I learn important things, but I'm in exile, right? Now just stay close with me for a second, okay? Stay close with me. See, earlier on, when the baby looks into the eyes of the mother, the baby can find himself. The baby can find herself in the face of the mother. So the baby doesn't experience him or herself as being another. I can actually self-recognize, and we actually know based on studies today that there's actually possibly even some level of emergence of self in utero. So self-recognition is not alienation. Those are not the same. I can self-recognize and I can find myself. I can feel my beauty. If I would have any prayer to God, I would ask God that the people who know me can find themselves in my face. Right? Who wants to offer that as a prayer for yourself? Right? That people who really know you can find themselves in your face. And when I walk on the street and I pass by strangers, I want them to be able to find themselves in my face. And we want to find each other in each other's faces. Right? That's intimacy. Right? I can find myself in your face. But for most people, that's not true. For most people, there's a fundamental alienation. Again, it happens around age 8. When I become lonely, meaning I become alienated, I become separate, I become non-intimate with myself. I begin to live a non-erotic life. I've de-eroticized reality. I'm no longer part of the field of eros. And I can't feel the genuine, unique configuration of eros and its quality, its intimate quality, which is my own interior. So I become othered to myself. Then I look in the mirror and I say, oh, when I look in the mirror, and I'm looking right now in the box, I see my figure. I say, oh, that's what people see. They don't see me. They see that other. And so that moment of alienation is when I look in the mirror and I see an other and I realize that others are seeing that other. Oh my God. I want to tell you a story. Can I tell you a story? I'll tell you a story and then I want to, how we move beyond this. But here's the story. It's a story it's a West African story, because I want you to see this exists in every culture. And it's a story about a society that survives based on this ostensible miracle in which, and it's a mythic story in which every morning there's this steaming vat, right, of hot milk, right, that appears in the town square. This is how the myth goes, in the center of the town. It wasn't really a town square, right, but the center of the village. And so this particular young man who asks the elders, and he says, "What's which is Yiddish, and they probably don't speak Yiddish in West African stories, so I apologize for that. But he says, like, what's going on? Where does this milk come from? And the elders, they say, don't ask. Like, you're not allowed to ask that, right? Don't ask. But he wants to know, like the young want to know, which is so beautiful. He's got this, he needs to know. So he gets up early one morning, right? And he watches, he doesn't see anything. And then all of a sudden the milk's there. He can't understand where it came from. And another morning, a third morning, a fifth morning, until finally he begins to have eyes to see. And he sees the most beautiful apparition, the most beautiful woman, the most beautiful goddess, the most beautiful incarnation of she, right, descends, and she brings down, right, the steaming vat of milk, and she places it with infinite love in the center of the town. And he can't control himself. He leaps out from his hiding place in the bushes, and he reaches for her arm, and she somehow allows him to hold her wrist. And he says, I can't live without you. Please, right? Please be my partner. Please marry me. It's this strange moment in which the finite meets the infinite and the mortal meets the goddess. And she looks at him. She looks at him and she melts before him and he melts before her. And she says, yes. Yes, I'll be your partner. I'll be your wife, but I have only one condition. Right? There's a box that I have. Right? And in that box, I'm going to bring with me, I'm going to go to heaven and I'm going to bring that box down and I'm going to place that box, under our bed, and promise me not to open it, because if you do open it, I may have to leave. And he's shocked at the yes of the goddess, and he says, oh, of course. And she ascends to heaven and she comes back with this beautiful box. And it's not Pandora's box, it's a different box, the beautiful box, and she places it, and they come together in the union of the human and the goddess, and they have 3 most beautiful children, and they love each other, and they sing and they walk and they dance and they make love, and right, and years go by, and he gets more and more curious, right? You can imagine, right? He's just got to know, right? What's in this box, right? What's there, right? What's there? Is she high, right? And finally, she's away with the children, right? One day, and she's gone away for several days. And you understand what happens, everyone, right? He goes under the bed and he reaches for the box and he's got to open it and he knows he shouldn't and he can't bear it and he's kind of overcome and he opens the box. It's empty. He shuts the box. He puts it back under the bed. She comes home. You know, when women know what their men have done, right, when they're not home, that's an ironclad rule, right? She says, you opened the box. He said, yes, I opened the box. And she said, I may have to leave. She said, what do you mean you may have to? He said, I may have to leave. She said, I have one question for you. Yes, tell me the question, I'll answer. What was in the box? And he says, what do you mean what was in the box? The box was empty. And she says, no, my husband, the box wasn't empty. My beloved, when I went to heaven, I went and I found the most sensitive feelings. I found the most beautiful sights. I found the most fragrant smells. I found the deepest nuance and depth of being and emotion and touch and vision, all of it. That which was most precious to me, I put in the box. And you opened my box and you thought it was empty. I can't stay. Wow. Right? That's what it means to be lonely. What it means to be lonely is I can't feel you feeling me. When you look at me, you see an other. You see a function. You see an outside. You may see some of my power. You might even see some of my vulnerability, but you can't put it together. You're not witness to my life. You don't see my story from beginning to end. You don't feel me on the inside. You don't know my purity. You don't feel my goodness. You can't feel my fear. You can't feel my desperation. You can't feel what it feels like when I contract and my throat closes and I feel like I'm going to die and my heart's going to burst open and I'm left alone. So I feel I have to leave. But actually, now stay with me, okay? Stay with me deeply. Actually, the goddess doesn't need to leave. You can actually stay. And you can try and explain what's in the box. And you can try and invite the person in. And it's going to always be imperfect. And Heidegger was wrong. Heidegger said there's always ultimately loneliness between two people. It's a chasm that can never be traversed. It's not true. We actually can find each other. We actually can open up. We can actually speak of your love in the morning. I can actually trust you in the nights. And it's gradual and it's not sudden and it's step by step and it's detail by detail and it's poignancy by poignancy and it's kiss by kiss. It's my heart kisses your heart. And we see each other and we write each other an outrageous love letter. Or we tell each other the story of our outrageous act of love and we let each other be witnessed. We let each other feel each other's quality. And it's slow and it accumulates until one day I realize I'm actually not alone. It's imperfect. It's all imperfect. Every offering is imperfect. But of course, there's a crack. There's a crack in everything that God's made. There's a crack in all of our intimacies. But in that crack, in that imperfection, that's how the love gets in. That's how the light gets in. We actually can liberate each other from loneliness. We actually can find each other. We actually can feel each other. And we have to touch each other. And sometimes we can't touch each other physically. So we've got to touch each other emotionally. We all want to touch and be touched. And actually the desire to be touched is called prehension, right? It's the proto-desire to touch that lives at the very molecular level of reality. Molecules want to liberate each other from loneliness. We want to open our hearts. We want to be strong and let each other see our glory. Let each other see our might. Let each other see our power. Let each other see our greatness. We want to confess our greatness to each other. And We want to confess our brokenness, and we want to confess our vulnerability, and we want to confess our pain. And we want to hold each other so that no one's ever alone and no one's ever outside the circle. Right? Can you feel that? When people actually are in the circle, then you don't need to put people outside the circle. Wow. Wow. Who's willing to be in the circle together? All of us. The beginning of this revolution, at one love, one communion, changing the world through outrageous love. Many paths, but one mountain, is actually each of us committing to stay and to keep liberating each other from loneliness and to keep seeing each other and to show up every week and to actually be audacious in our lives and not to give up. Right? Giving up is so easy. Giving up means you're not leaving Egypt. We talked about in the first part of our broadcast, we talked about leaving Egypt, which is the political act of the rejection of the status quo when we leave Egypt. But Egypt also means literally in Hebrew, the narrow place, the broken place. We leave our broken place. We don't let yesterday determine today. If I was lonely yesterday, I don't have to be lonely today. You know, sometimes, can I just tell you something? Can I share something just between us? Right? Sometimes I'll be walking. I was recently on a subway in New York about a year ago, where I was walking through Miami, and there was someone sitting who was a little bit of a bum on a bench, and we caught each other's eye. And that moment we saw each other. And that moment we were liberated from loneliness. It can happen in 1,000 moments between strangers. And it happens in the deep places where we stay together and we know we're not going to leave. We're not going to leave. We're never going to go away. Or we're always together, never not. And we're going to make this revolution. And this revolution is going to be the articulation of first principles. It's going to be to write a great library. It's going to be to make the Da Vinci move in culture in this time between worlds and this time between stories. But it can't be the Lenin Marxist revolution where we destroy people along the way and millions of people get destroyed, right? You crack eggs to make an omelet. No, each person counts. Doesn't mean we don't call people. Doesn't mean we don't give, right? We don't give, right, serious feedback. It means we never give up, right? No one's ever cast away from the table, right? Step inside, right? Become part of this revolution. Right? Commit to liberate yourself from loneliness. Commit to find your unique voice. Commit to give your unique gift, right? Commit to know that the world needs your service. The world needs to feel your quality. And if you hide your quality, right, you're hiding something the world desperately needs. There's 3 reasons, we end here. There's 3 reasons why people are lonely. 1, we're lonely because we can't find anyone, right? We know our quality. We desperately want to share it, but we can't find anyone. So let's find each other. Let's find people for each other, right? Let's find each other. Let's find people we can. And if you know someone who should meet someone, put them together. Introduce people to each other, right? Find our way. Look for each other. Let's make this huge effort. So 1 is, I need someone with whom to share my soul print, with whom to share, right, my unique self. So 1 reason we're lonely, we can't find anyone. So we're going to find each other. The 2nd reason we're lonely is because we actually don't know how to tell our story. We don't know, right, how to communicate. We don't know how to touch each other. We don't know how to be intimate. We're lost in our broken patterns. We're lost in our false core sentence. We don't actually realize the impact we have, right? We can't find ourselves. We don't know how to share. So we got to learn how to share. Okay, we need to learn how to share the gorgeousness that we are. But friends, the deepest reason that we're lonely, because we've actually become alienated from our own unique quality. We actually can't find ourselves, right? We're disembodied. We're cut off from the somatic, felt quality of our unique self-gorgeousness. So we got to find ourselves, right? And where do we find ourselves? In each other's eyes.